Reviving communities.
The views expressed on this program do not necessarily represent those of Revive FM or its management.
Hello, good afternoon. You are locked into Revive FM 94.0 on the Power Hour with myself, your host, Louise Power. This show is about community matters, diversity and inclusion, a platform for women, leadership, entrepreneurship, and inspirational stories. And today in the studio, I have the honor of being joined in conversation with Paul Cleal OBE. How are you today? Welcome to the show, Paul.
I'm very well, Louise. It's very nice to see you. Sorry I can't be with you more in person, but this is the world we live in, I guess. Now,
it's the virtual world, isn't it?
For another 3 weeks, maybe, or maybe longer. Who knows?
We really don't know how long. It's so. Whereabouts in the country are you today?
I am in London SE1, which in kind of real speak is sort of between Tower Bridge and London Bridge, so pretty close to the centre. It's where I've been living for the best part of 10 years.
So you're experiencing the same level of rain that I'm experiencing?
Yeah. It's mind you, we can't complain. It's been pretty good, hasn't it? And it looks like it's going to be quite good the next few days.
So Paul is a non-executive board member for Guy's and St Thomas NHS Foundation Trust, the Metropolitan Police, the National Citizen Services Trust, and he's an equality advisor to the board of the FA, so the Premier League. But I will let you introduce yourself in a much better way than I'll be able to. There's so many more things actually that you do, so I'll let you introduce yourself to the listeners.
Well, thanks, Louise. Yeah, well, these days, as you say, I'm a non-executive director generally and an advisor. So I run what is usually referred to as a portfolio of roles, as distinct from a sort of single career. I was for many years a partner at PricewaterhouseCoopers, which is, or PwC as it's often known, one of the largest global consulting and financial advisory firms. I was partner there for 16 years until 2017. So I was a specialist in corporate finance originally. I've also done a lot of consulting work in government and held various leadership positions, both in the UK and over in Africa as well. And I lived in Nigeria for a short period as part of my role on the Africa board of the firm. Nigeria, actually Lagos, where I was living, is actually the city of my dad's birth as well. And then since I left the firm in 2017, I started this portfolio. It's taken in quite a few different areas, including universities and other educational roles. But in the last couple of years in particular, I've started to pick up some, I guess, the particular roles that you've mentioned. And it's been a real honour actually being involved with the NHS over the course of the pandemic and seeing at close quarters how the team has coped with that and the incredible efforts that they've made at both Guy's and St Thomas's hospitals, which obviously included at one point having the Prime Minister in one of our hospitals at St Thomas's April last year. Feels like a very long time ago. And also working with the Commissioner, Dame Cressida Dick, at the Metropolitan Police, again, seeing an incredible range of issues and challenges. And of course, in my beloved area of football, working with the board of the Premier League, taking forward the agenda really post Black Lives Matter, the players' campaign, taking the knee, etc., which started just under a year ago, I guess, when the league restarted post-COVID, post the first lockdown. And I've been working and leading the work on the No Room for Racism Action Plan. They've been my three big areas of work over the last year, and it's kept me very busy in that area where you couldn't go anywhere. It's been quite nice to be gainfully employed, mostly from home, with the occasional face-to-face meeting. Yeah, so that's what I've been up to.
Yeah, I can imagine just how busy it's been for you because, of course, at Guy's and St Thomas, with COVID and having to, juggle all of that, and then of course all of the work that you're doing around diversity and inclusion, and having to, the past year with the global uprising of Black Lives Matter and all of the agendas which corporations are trying to put in place at the moment to increase diversity within their organizations, having reflected, of course, on practices of the past. And I wanted to ask, where did I know that you was at PricewaterhouseCoopers for many years. And where did your D&I work start? Like, how did that first come about?
Well, it started there back in 2003. I mean, if I go back before that, then I mean, I don't really recall much around the term diversity and inclusion being used in a business or organizational sense. So it was around that time, I think 2003, when the firm decided that it would appoint a director of diversity, and they held some focus groups, and they basically asked various groups of people whether they wanted to form, I guess, what we now call networks, or sometimes employee resource groups. And I was invited to come to one of those focus groups, which was essentially around ethnic minorities within the firm. And PwC is a very large firm, and at the time there were about 800 partners, and the partners are the owners of the business. So the 800 of us at that time, basically run the business and share the profits. And I was one of 8 out of 800 non-white partners. So, and I was the only one of the 8 who went to that meeting. So I got to be the chair of because I was the most senior person there. I'd only been a partner for 2 years, but I was the most senior person there. So I was asked to chair it. I agreed, thought it was interesting. There was a demand among the people there to have some kind of network. So we had the first meeting and decided that we would work together to try and raise the profile, if you like, of race and ethnicity issues within the firm, which hadn't really been discussed before, and also to see whether we could generate some change. And of course, the first thing we noticed when we sat around the table, probably 10 or 12 of us, was that we were probably the most diverse group of people we'd ever sat in a room with, because we were all different. And of course, we'd been lumped into one meeting because we were all minorities, but of course there were no 2 of us who were from the same background. There were a mixture of different Asian, different African backgrounds, a few others as well, some of us from the UK, some from further afield, but we felt we had a common cause, so we really started from there. And after that, it was left to me to really, as the chair of the group, to report into the board and tell them what we thought needed to change. And I suppose one of the things that is part of my style is that I try to tell it like it is. And I wanted to leave the board in no sort of doubt that they were talking a good game, but not necessarily living up to it. But I probably did it in a nice enough way that we engaged in the conversation, and it led a couple of years later to them actually asking me, the senior partner asked me to join the board of the firm. So I became the first non-white board member, also at the time the youngest ever board member of the firm too. And it gave me a platform to really try and push for some change. And that was really the beginnings of my work in diversity and inclusion. And as the chief people officer, as we would now call it, I had responsibility for it formally. But for most of my career, it's been a sideline alongside the various work I've done. And my work in promoting inclusion has in many ways been just being a role model and doing my job well and taking leadership positions in the firm. But sometimes it does require specific efforts to push on equality, diversity and inclusion. And that's been happening a lot in the last year for obvious reasons.
Yeah, I'm imagining just how busy you are. I am a trustee at an organisation called Changing the Chemistry, where we are increasing diversity in the boardroom. And I'm thinking about, that when you started your journey as a non-executive director, and the fact that you was the only, person of colour in that environment. And of course, the marginally, just how, far set apart we are in terms of increasing that diversity in the boardroom. And has there been some has there been, from what you can see over the years, have you seen that kind of increase? Have you seen things get better in terms of some of the things that have been put in place, so that there is more opportunities for people to get into these non-executive roles?
I think things have improved in some ways and not in others. So I think if you look around organisations now, typically you will see more people from minorities at senior levels than you would have done 10, 15 years ago, for sure. But it's equally true that there are more people from minorities than there were 10 or 15 years ago. So I'm not sure the extent to which the representation has changed drastically. It's got better in some places, definitely, and the fruits of our labours in PwC are very clear, in the sense that if you go back to that initial meeting when I was essentially 8 out of 800, I was 1% essentially of the partnership in terms of what's now classified as Black, Asian and minority ethnic. Well, that figure hit 10% last year for the same firm. So that's got to be progress. I think whilst there has been a growth in the population of non-white people, visible minorities, in that period, it hasn't been tenfold. So I think there's definitely been progress. I think progress has been a bit uneven between different groups. So some ethnicities have made more progress than others. A lot of that is socioeconomic as well. Some ethnic groups clearly are sort of financially, on average, better off than others. So they tend to make more progress in the workplace. So yeah, a lot of it as a lot of things have got better. Some of that's due to the efforts on diversity inclusion. Some of it's due to just the elapse of time and demographic change. I think we're in a better place than we were, but there's a hell of a long way to go. And I'm still, I mean, in a lot of the meetings I'm in at senior level, I'm still surrounded by a sea of white faces, to be honest. And I'm used to that. But the last year's been, I'm sure we'll talk about it, but the last year's been very interesting, and I think quite illuminating to the extent to which I think people generally haven't really thought about race issues, and certainly not been willing to talk about them. And we've made some breakthroughs in the last year in that regard, I think.
Yeah, I've been speaking, quite a lot about the fact that I feel as though COVID itself and the pandemic and being in lockdown and being at home has brought about the opportunity then to see and to feel and to be still. I call it the perfect storm, actually, where we was at home, we was engaged, and we was connected then to what happened to George Floyd. Had COVID not been, I don't feel as though if COVID hadn't been an element, I'm not sure if George Floyd would have got the justice that he deserved at the time, because there's been so many George Floyds over the years.
Yeah.
Have you got a similar stance on that as well? Do you think that the two elements, of course, it is part of the reason why we are getting the diversity and inclusion, looking at the equality and looking at the way in which that things should be? Do you think that largely got to do with it?
Yeah, 100%. I think COVID's been a big factor. I think, as you rightly say, there have been other similar cases to, sad cases to George Floyd's over the years, and they've often made the news. Usually make the news, but they don't stick in the way that this one did. And I'm sure it was largely to do with the fact that we see, don't we? I mean, regularly on the news, sadly, all sorts of terrible stories. Some to do with ethnicity, others to do with disasters at home or far-flung places, terrorist attacks on our doorstep in some cases. But life, we're busy and life goes on, and that's the reality, isn't it? I mean, it doesn't go on for the people who are directly involved, but for the large part of the population, we probably, if we're honest, go to work, worry about it for a day, and then don't worry about it so much the day after. But I think the George Floyd's death was pitched into a vacuum in that sense, where people were, I think, not only not doing their daily stuff so they had more time to think about it, but I think also we were probably still in a bit of an emotional shock about the effects of the pandemic, and it kind of lit the blue touch paper, didn't it? So I think that was a big factor. I think the other thing about COVID that I've observed everywhere is that it appears to have done, I think I will say, two things. It sped up the process of change in many cases. I think a lot of us will not go back to habits that we had before the pandemic. Maybe we would have got out of those habits in 5 or 10 years' time, but it's going to happen sooner because of COVID. And the second thing it's done is magnify things, and I think it's really kind of blown up to huge proportions. Some of the things that were perhaps not so visible to us are now really, really clear, and racial inequality is one of those, but poverty and lots of other issues I think also have been shown up by this. And of course COVID has magnified the differences between rich and poor, and made those gaps bigger.
Absolutely. And there would have been some significant things coming up in the area of around your non-executive for it with, guys at guys and with the Met and with the FA, in terms of the fact that there were lots of people from the BAME community that were really affected by COVID. Of course, the Met have been doing a lot of work in terms of building those relationships again with the BAME community, and the FA, around uh, uh, the overt racism that the players have been experiencing. I can imagine that you've been involved in all of those different types of things that have been happening in those areas. And has have there been anything in particular that you can say that in any of those areas that have been reinforced whilst you've been involved in that work, that you can see visually in the future becoming something that has been put in place, that of course will benefit any of those sectors?
Well, I hope there's going to be some benefits out of this. It'll be pretty dreadful, and not much reward for all the effort that's gone in if we don't get anywhere. I mean, I think if you take the three areas, and in the health sector, we've seen, I think, a couple of different things. We've seen the effect of health inequalities across ethnicities. That's for sure. We saw a lot of that in the early days of the epidemic, and we talking about how Black and ethnic minority groups have been disproportionately affected by COVID as a disease. And then we've seen more recently how uptake of vaccines has been lower among the same groups. So there's two things going on there: something about health inequalities in the first place, and then something about trust in the second case. I think those things have been true for a long time. This is my point about magnification. I think it's become much more obvious to the authorities that that's the case. And I think in some senses the NHS has been in a bit of denial about those differences for a long time, hasn't really grasped things. I sense now that there is a wake-up call that's been heard, and there is now, I think, a real realization that things have to change, and that has to mean more representation of all communities at the top of these organizations, so that we can actually understand how different communities interact with the health service, and how they need, in some cases, to be equal in terms of its effect. We need to do things differently for people, and that's a learning that I don't think was there before. I think there's been an assumption amongst the majority that if you essentially offer everybody the same service in principle, then you'll get the same outcomes for everyone and it'll be fair. Well, that's not how life works, and I think that's also coming into the understanding of policing too. And I think in football, the players have been brilliant in the way that they've stood up, and at the Premier League, I think we've seen people react to that and wanting to see change. And one of the positive aspects has been the collaboration between the Premier League, where I've been working, the FA, which is a sort of distinct organisation, the Football League, and other parts of football coming together to, for example, write a pretty stinging letter to Twitter and Facebook about what's been going on social media and their level of inaction to stop it. And then later coming together to do a social media blackout, which we then saw other sports joining. So I think that kind of collective action and the recognition that actually we get further if we work together, I hope will be a long-lasting effect of COVID. But I think we'll also see in the health service, and I hope in the police too, some realization coming into doing things differently that people will really see. But what I think people have to realize is that if you want to address racial inequalities, then you can't just leave it to a group of white people at the top to do that. You need to get everyone on board and involved. And that comes back to this collaboration point. It takes everyone's input to really understand what's going on and then to design solutions to make things better.
Everybody needs to do their little part towards racial inequality. Absolutely right. We are going to go into a short commercial break, and we will be right back. You are locked into Revive FM 94.0 on the Power Hour with myself, Louise Power. Please do not touch that dial. I've got Paul Cleal in the studio with me today, and we are speaking all things diversity and inclusion. Please do not touch that dial.
If you want to advertise your business on Revive FM, then visit www.revivefm.co.uk or contact our sales team now on 07944 565616. That's 07944 565616. Advertise with Revive FM.
Thinking about selling or letting your home? With Maxwell Estates, you don't need to look any further. Well established with over 15 years of experience, Maxwell Estates are specialists in residential sales and lettings. We manage over 200 properties in and around Northwest London, keeping our landlords and tenants updated with all the latest laws and legislations. Based in Edgware, our experienced specialist negotiators always ensure we maximize the full potential of your property. Call us now on 0208 952 0808 for a free no obligation quotation, or visit our website www.maxwellestates.co.uk for further information. Maxwell Estates, the name you can trust.
Does your pizza excite you? London Pizza Depot invites you on a journey with our worldwide inspired pizzas. Be it the sizzling hearts of New York with the NYC hot dog pizza, or the cobble streets of Greece with our Greek goddess. Transport yourself with every bite. Our authentically prepared, hand-stretched dough, freshly diced veg, finest cuts of halal meat, and our 100% mozzarella cheese ensures the delivery of a masterpiece every time. Visit londonpizzadepot.co.uk or our branches in Ilford or Plaistow. This Ramadan, enjoy 50% off when you spend over £15. T&Cs apply.
मिनहाज वेलफेयर फाउंडेशन में आपका अतिया जिंदगी की उम्मीद आपकी मदद से मुमकिन हुआ। दुनिया भर में 30 लाख से ज्यादा खवातीन, बुजुर्गों और बच्चों तक साफ पानी की फ्राहमी, मुतासरा इलाकों में हंगामी इमदाद, यतीम और बेसहारा बच्चों की दादरसी। इस साल हम आपके ताउन से और आगे बढ़ना चाहते हैं। अपनी ज़कात, सदकात और खैरात के जरिए इन मंसूबों का हिस्सा बनिए। अभी कॉल कीजिए 0300 3030 777 या हमारी वेबसाइट विजिट करें www.minhajwelfare.org.
Minhaj School of Islamic Sciences provides quality Islamic education for children aged between 5 and 15 years old. As well as teaching classical Islam, including Tajweed, Fiqh, Seerah, and Aqidah, we endeavor to equip children with essential Islamic manners, morals, and values. Here at MSIS, our experienced teachers create an inspirational learning environment where we strive to cater for the needs of every child. For enrollment inquiries, inquire in person at Minhaj School of Islamic Sciences, Monday to Friday, 5 to 7 p.m. at 292-296 Romford Road, or email admin.edu_London@minhajuk.org.
Ahoy there, matey. So you want to be a pirate, do you? Well, guess what? You now can at Fairlock Country Park. Come and hire one of our fantastic new boats at the lake. Find us on the tube on the Central Line or drive down from East London. Fun for the whole family, har! You can row, pedal, or even try kayaking. We're open on weekends, all school holidays from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. Come on down and set sail at Fairlock Country Park.
Nitro Treats, the dessert lab where your treats are formulated before your very eyes. Keep cool with our flavoured shaved ice, or chill out with our exclusive Dragon Breath Nitro ice creams. Experiment with our selection of mojitos, or indulge in our traditional faludas or lassies. Visit Nitro Treats at 210 Ilford Lane, where our nitrologists remain ready to serve. Nitro Treats, it's nitrolicious.
Revive FM
94.0 on the radio,
on your mobile,
and online.
Hello and welcome back to The Power Hour. Your host today, myself, Louise Power. This show is about community matters, diversity and inclusion, a platform for women, leadership, entrepreneurship, and inspirational stories. And today in the studio, I have Paul Cleal OBE. Welcome back to the show today.
Thanks, Louise. Interesting adverts.
It's been really it's been good to have you here today. It's half term. In the break, I was just checking in on my son because he's chilling out with me today in the studio, and he's been looking around and getting interested in all the buttons and what's going on here. So yeah, before the break, you and I were speaking about what's happening in terms of the climate for diversity and inclusion, and you shared with me your journey at PwC and your senior work that you was doing there, and your board work that you've been doing, and what you've been doing in terms of your different roles with DNI. So I wanted to ask you just a little bit more about, your backstory, really, where you come from, and because accessibility and opportunity is one of the things that come up a lot for me in my diversity and inclusion work, economically, in terms of different intersections, whether it's about race, whether it's about disability, whether it's about sexuality, or anything across that DNI spectrum, accessibility and opportunity come up a lot. And it'll be really good to just hear a little bit about Paul, Paul, and where you come from, and who you are, and connect, just sort of like engage and connect with the backstory of yourself.
Sure. Yeah. Well, the short answer to where I come from is Croydon, which may not be the most glamorous, but it was home to me for the first 30 years of my life. I think the reason why I think it's important people do talk about their backstory, and sometimes we forget, is that when you're perceived as being successful, which if you're a partner in a firm like mine and in a leadership role in it, you inevitably are perceived that way. And I guess that's understandable. It's not the only type of success, but it's what people think of as being successful often. Then often people make the assumption that you've always had it easy and kind of, it was bound to happen, and it could never happen for them. And it's only by sharing those stories, I guess, that people understand that perhaps something better can be possible. You can be socially mobile, if that's the term you use, or get on well. And that's been the case for me, really. I mean, I grew up in Croydon with a single mother, not a lot of resources around. But as I often say to people, when I say not a lot of resources, I mean money. I had a very loving and resourceful mother who was fantastic and devoted to me. And I mean, I have met very, very few people in my life who have had two parents to bring them up who have been more as effective as my one. So I'm very grateful for that. And she was a brilliant woman, and never gave up, incredibly resilient. And I think I took a lot from her resilience and learned from it. There's a lot of single mums around, and I'm talking to one, and I admire you all, and I think you do a fantastic job for your son, and I'm sure that other people work equally hard and do the same, and that's the foundation for me. It all starts at home. So my dad, the other thing that's unusual about me in terms of, I guess, where I've got to in the business world, etc., is that my dad was from Africa, born in Lagos, of Cameroonian background. My grandfather and grandmother left Cameroon to go to Nigeria just after the First World War, actually, when actually Cameroon and Nigeria didn't exist. I mean, they were kind of colonies, weren't they, at the time? So he went there, and my dad was born and brought up there. So my dad came to London in 1948 by boat from Lagos via Liverpool, and he came here to study at Guy's Hospital, where I'm now a board member. So that's ironic, I suppose.
In itself.
Yeah, and I was brought up for the first 8 years of my life. My mum and I, we didn't have our own place. We shared a room in a flat that with my mum's uncle. So he was my great uncle, but I called him granddad because he was older. And he was actually for much of his career a Metropolitan Police officer. So again, I'm now on the board of the Met Police. So it's amazing, isn't it? How these things come around. So that's kind of where I grew up, in a kind of unremarkable street next to the main line of London to Brighton Railway in Croydon. And I sort of progressed through school. I did well, 11 plus, got a scholarship to a good school, and that really was my big break. And I guess kind of opened me up to a different sort of social strata, and probably led to my accent changing a bit, sort of tempered a bit, and learning some different ways, and I guess opening my eyes a bit. And occasionally I had occasional contact with my dad, who would sort of show up maybe once a year for a night and stay with us. So relationships were sort of cordial, positive, but not much in terms of content, if you like. But he did leave, as you can imagine, I think it's an important impression on me, and he would leave books about Africa and Cameroon in particular, which I'd never visited, but I thought about a lot, and it was kind of there in the background, I think. And it was a difficult time in the 70s. I'm 55 now, so I grew up sort of largely in the sort of 70s, where there's a lot of racial abuse, and I got a fair bit of it myself, both in terms of verbal and physical abuse, which I think, again, with my mum's resilience, it helped me get over. And I think, even as I've been successful, I kind of always carry those memories with me, and I'm not sort of bitter or resentful about it, but I think it's important that people don't forget it, and you can, when you get successful, kind of almost rise above it. You move to different areas, you get away from a lot of that sort of type of behaviour, as you move in what some people might call better circles or higher circles. But it's still there, and I know it still exists, and we've seen that online, haven't we? As you mentioned earlier, with the footballers recently, in terms of that sort of abuse still being in the forefront of people's existence, not in the background. I went to university. I had a really good time. I think it was a really great formative experience. I recommend it to young people, mainly as much for the kind of personal, social development as the academic. That got me then into, I guess, the beginnings of my career, which had a sad start, because my mum, who obviously I'd been entirely reliant on for all of my life until then, sadly passed away sort of just after I left university, which kind of, I guess, impacted on my early sort of progression work-wise. But I kind of found my feet working in Croydon Council, actually, in my hometown sort of local authority. Worked for a very inspirational guy there, who was the deputy chief executive, who taught me a lot, and I think influenced my sort of personal style a great deal. And he was very egalitarian. I mean, he treated everyone the same, really, whether they were his boss or the lowest of the low, which at the time when I joined I was. And I've kind of taken on board that kind of view, really, and that idea of social equality, that everyone's as good as each other, is really important to me. And I guess when I was being badly treated when I was a kid, I just wanted to be given an equal chance. And I've kind of dedicated a lot of my sort of career to making sure, as far as I can, that other people get that chance. Now, you have to take those chances. Nothing gets given to you. And, despite what some of the newspapers say about people from immigrant backgrounds, it's not easier for immigrants, is it? It's complete rubbish. It's much harder. And but people don't complain. They get on with it. They're successful. They work for their children, and people progress. And that's really, I guess, what drives me, really. It's about trying to help people have those opportunities, and that's kind of where I come from. And around that time, just after my mum died, actually, my dad invited me over to Africa for the first time around that time as well. So I kind of had my first connection, really, with my wider African family, which turns out to be somewhat huge, as a lot of Cameroonian families are. And we're kind of very different. My dad had 10 kids, so I went from being an only child with a single mother to being one of 10. That was quite, and of course, spending time in an African village, a place called Dibombari, just outside Douala, the biggest city in Cameroon, where I've been many times over the course of the last 30 odd years. And I'm kind of part of that extended family, and have been now for longer than I lived with my mum for, actually. Yeah. And then the other person I should mention on a sort of personal level is Suzanne, my wife, who I met actually at the university at Warwick, just towards the end, which was just as well, because as she said, all I was interested in really was playing football at the time, and I didn't have time for girlfriends. So, but we met just after the football season ended, which was handy, and we're still together 34 years later. So, yeah, so we've been married since 1995. No kids, but and she's not listening now. She never does listen to my interviews because she knows what I think, what I say. So so that's kind of us, really. And we like travelling and sport. The Premier League thing is a connection to my long history of watching football, particularly Crystal Palace, Croydon's team. Who were part of the Premier League, and also I'm a big cricket fan too. Suzanne joins me at a lot of that, and obviously watching on TV more in the last year. So yeah, that's kind of my backstory, really. It's a mixture of Croydon, Cameroon, yeah, I guess and I guess a successful career, which I guess a highlight of which for me recently was being awarded the OBE in the New Year's Honours List 2020, which we didn't get to go to Buckingham Palace, but I just got a letter this morning actually saying that the investiture's back on for 3 weeks' time. So we're off to collect the gong
Congratulations.
in our best clothes. Yeah.
Yeah. In your best dress, as my grandmother would say.
Absolutely, yeah. The new suit, the new suit I bought over a year ago to go to the palace to get the award has not been worn. It's still hanging up in the cupboard. Hopefully the moths haven't got it. I'm going to check it out later on. But I just got the letter early on this morning on my way here.
Congratulations! I think that's fantastic. I think it's excellent.
Thanks.
I think that your story is very inspirational, and thank you for sharing it with us. And I don't believe there are ever any mistakes. Everything is meant to be. Your connection in there with the Met, your connection in there with when you're, with Guy's Hospital as well. Sometimes I'm quite like that. I believe that everything's meant to be. It sort of came around in that way. And you're from inner city London, and although you was raised by a single parent, there's obviously some fantastic, phenomenal things that your mum done in terms of being a parent, but also being a great mentor.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, she was a great guide, and I use the values that she taught me every day of my life, and I try and pass them on to others as well.
Yeah, and in the news lately, and over the last couple of days, I thinking about where you're from in Croydon, and just thinking about inner London in general, and thinking about being a young Black man at the time, and the choices that you made, decisions you made, has meant that the footprint that and where you've been able to go has taken a particular line where, of course, you've become very successful, and as well as becoming successful, you've been able to impact others. But there's a lot going on in a city with young Black boys, young men in general, and over the last couple of days, as we know, we've heard about them stabbing each other. There's been Hyde Park. There's been all of these really, really sad scenarios. So stories like yours for me, when I do these shows and there's representation, that actually it goes a long way, for people to be inspired and to realize that there are other opportunities, there are other decisions, there is university, there is starting your own business, this show going out to executive leaders and people across the network of C-suite managers and everybody that that are in our networks, that can kind of understand and hear the stories about how intrinsically, because of people's personal circumstance, socio-economical circumstance, these are the things that add to all of the different ecosystems of why these things happen sometimes, and why, of course, you have pockets of the community that are really struggling.
Yeah, and of course the events you refer to, which really saddened me, seeing the pictures of young men with machetes. I mean, it's bad in itself, but of course one of the realities of that is that people tend to draw conclusions that that's what all Black people are like. And I suppose, I mean, I would want people to see what I do and what lots of other people do alongside that, and not to draw the conclusions. They don't look at my success and draw the conclusion that everyone like me is bound to be successful at all. I'm sometimes thought of as the exception that proves the rule. Well, that's just wrong. There's lots of successful Black people, and I'm privileged to know and work with a number of them. And some of us have clubbed together to create an investment fund, and I've met through the course of that some incredibly successful people, who want to make a difference to the wider community and do it via investment. Other people, some of us do it via mentoring as well. I've been with one of my favorite mentees at lunchtime today, and that's always great for me to have a boost of energy and see young people on the way up doing well at university, and moving into their careers, and if I can be of a help to them along the way, then I love to do that. I like going back to schools, doing bits of mentoring there as well, and it's really important to me to kind of have that, because I didn't always have that obvious role model like me going forward, and I think to the extent that I can be that, then I like to do it, and I realise actually that, because I've said it to a few people, well, you've really helped me over the years, and they've said, oh really, I had no idea. And I think people often don't, and because they do it naturally, and you have to be a bit more conscious and intentional about these things sometimes, and make sure that you do notice the effect you have and are conscious of that, and then you can do more of it. And it doesn't have to take a huge amount of your time, but it's very, 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 very rewarding. And whether it's I like to help my family as far as I can as well, and do a bit of that, so that's all important to me.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's just I'm in awe. I'm just listening. I'm soaking it all up. I'm soaking it all up, Paul. I really am. And what would you say should corporations be thinking about now at this time in reflection? Everybody's really busy. Everybody wants to do something, and I hope that for the most part they genuinely want to ingrain change. They genuinely want to impact the community. They genuinely want to increase diversity and inclusion. What are some of the things that organizations should really be thinking about for the future now, if they want to make impactful long-term change? Because let's face it, it's easy, isn't it, for us to make a workplace diverse, but can we keep people? Will they stay? Can we have retention? Do they belong? Like Verna Myers says, we invite them to the party, but we invite them along to the party, but can they dance with us, right?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And and are they even actually really allowed on the best bit of the dance floor, closest to the DJ or whatever? I don't know how you take that analogy forward, but you know what I mean. But yeah, I mean, one of the things that I think the first thing that businesses and other organizations, public sector included, charities included, need to do is have a change of mindset about all this. And I think that's really the most fundamental, because you can tinker with your HR policies, have lots of internships and all that sort of good stuff as much as you want. And a lot of them are really, really good. But you won't get people in the boardroom who look different unless you really change your mindset. And I'm not talking here about just a matter of social justice and fairness. I'm talking about what the mindset being, this is good for our organization, and actually we might fail if we don't get it right. And I think the narrative about diversity and inclusion is too much assumed to be about somehow watering down the quality of people that are going to come into the organization in the interests of some kind of politically correct racial balance. And it's the biggest load of rubbish I've ever heard, but I hear it a lot. And I hear it from some really sensible senior people a lot as well. Not necessarily as blatantly as that, but it's in the fear of what they're trying to do that stops them making steps forward. So changing that mindset and recognizing that this is, in the first instance, about meritocracy. It's about getting the best people in. It's not watering down the quality. It's getting the best people in and giving them all the chance. Talent is evenly distributed across all races and ethnicities, but opportunities aren't. And if you can give the talent the opportunity, you'll get better results. You'll get better individuals. That's the first point. And the second half of it is about the effect, which is stunning, of having groups of people around the table who are different and entering their thoughts into a debate. Because when you get a group of people who are all the same, they reach a conclusion very, very quickly, and it's often the wrong one. It's not very imaginative, and they just do the same, or they take small conservative changes. When you get groups of people from all over, completely different lived experience, and you get that more with people of different ethnicity than you do within one single ethnicity, then you start to get really rich debate. It's harder. It takes longer to reach agreement. You can fall out a bit, but you get to a better end result, and that diversity drives better business outcomes. And McKinsey have written, I think, 3 reports now about that. So it's first about getting the best people in, and then secondly about letting them, through inclusion, debate and come up with more imaginative, innovative solutions. And it's that monoculture, all the same types of people who are only really slightly different from each other, that's holding back this country, I think. And I think we've got a great opportunity to really improve and go forward if we can really give everyone the chance to contribute.
That's it. It's about diversity of thought. and we don't want to have the same. It's actually, first of all, it's boring having the same outcomes all the time. And you don't get it isn't fair. It isn't equal, right? It isn't equal across the board. You need diversity of thought. You need to understand different people's experiences, and as you said, have healthy debate, and then recognize each other, each other's point of view. It's so important to have diversity of thought. When I first, I have a trustee position, but I didn't know really anything about what a non-executive director was, because I didn't know any non-executive directors. I didn't know anything about what being a trustee was, because I didn't come from that demographic of lifestyle. And as a woman, single mother, Black woman, I've learned all of that, and I really want people from the community that I come from to realize that there's lots of jargon, there's lots of things that go out onto these adverts, and people think, oh, I couldn't possibly apply to be a non-executive director, but actually that you could come with so many different skill sets, so many different types of transferable skills, so many different qualifications, and there's so much value that somebody can add in the boardroom from different walks of life.
Yeah, and I think that's the really important point, that if you're getting people from similar places, then all they're going to do is add the same views as everyone else who's already around the table. And you also have to bear in mind that everyone who's a non-executive director was once not a non-executive director, and everyone had to start somewhere. And somewhere, therefore, people are making assumptions about who's suitable to do that first non-exec director role, and too often it's people from a pretty narrow demographic who are known to recruitment consultants, known to the people running the businesses. They're part of a network, and what we see is a very, very strong networking effect, where people who know each other bring other people within their network into roles because they basically trust them and they think they'll be good. They may not have the experience, but they think, oh, they'll get there. If you don't know somebody and they're from outside your network, how do you know if they're any good or not? You don't. So that's a big factor. And one of the reasons why a lot of people from minority backgrounds increasingly are doing much more in the way of not just mentoring, but encouraging younger people to come into their networks and trying to give them opportunities to try and level the playing field and give people a kind of equal chance. So those factors are sort of just natural political factors among groups of people, that they favour people that they know, who do things the way they do, who are like them in some way. That's just kind of natural. And sometimes, as part of that mindset change, people have to set that aside and question themselves a bit and say, well, hold on a minute, what do I need to create the best team? Where do I get the best people, and not just go for the nearest lazy solution, which is often what happens, even in top organisations.
Absolutely. And the nepotism, isn't it, that they call it, like a nepotism?
Yeah, some of that. I mean, some of it isn't even that bad. It's just a matter of, it's just easy. I mean, we used to recruit at PwC. I mean, most people, I didn't go to Oxford or Cambridge, but most, we had a very high percentage of people from Oxford and Cambridge. We had a very high percentage of people from independent schools. And it's easy to go to the best schools and the best universities because on average, the people there are very good. And, but on average, they probably tend to be, less people from minorities and people from certain better socioeconomic backgrounds. And it biases the group of people you've got. And, you've got to kind of keep enriching the gene pool. And that's, let's say, all part of the mindset shift that I refer to.
Absolutely. We're going to go into another very, very short commercial break, and then we'll be right back to the last half of the show. So please do not touch that dial. You are locked into the Power Hour with myself, Louise Power, and Paul Cleal. We'll be right back.
Nitro Treats, the dessert lab where your treats are formulated before your very eyes. Keep cool with our flavoured shaved ice, or chill out with our exclusive Dragon Breath Nitro ice creams. Experiment with our selection of mojitos, or indulge in our traditional faludas or lassies. Visit Nitro Treats at 210 Ilford Lane, where our nitrologists remain ready to serve. Nitro Treats, it's nitrolicious.
If you want to advertise your business on Revive FM, then visit www.revivefm.co.uk. Alternatively, contact our sales team now on 07944 56 5616. That's 07944 56 5616.
Revive FM.
94.0. On the radio.
On your mobile.
And online.
Hello, hello, and welcome back. You are locked into Revive FM 94.0 and the Power Hour with your host today, myself, Louise Power. Today I am in conversation with Paul Cleal OBE. We've been speaking all things diversity and inclusion, and Paul has been sharing his backstory. We're in the last half of the show now, and we've been speaking about the impact of COVID and of course, the knock-on effect that it has had on the BAME community, and also just in terms of the global uprising of Black Lives Matter as a result of what's happened to George Floyd. And in saying that, I would really like to speak to you about BAME. Big subject at the moment. Big subject.
Yeah.
What are we going to do? I mean, people are asking me all the time, right? What, of course, I could mention the race report, right? I know that's a big.
Yeah, let's not go there, shall we?
Go there, right? But that was we already wasn't too hot on the BAME thing anyway, right? So, but now people are saying, well, as a result of that, and now as a result of the conversations of what's come out of that, what do we use instead? And there is no right, there is no wrong, there is no middle at the moment. I don't like it particularly. I like people to call me by my name, unless, of course, there's a particular reason why you need to monitor something specifically around my race or my gender. But where are we going? Where are we going into the future with this whole BAME thing? I don't like the fact it's all grouped together. What's your stance on it, Paul?
Well, like a lot of terms, Louise, I think they get brought in for a reason, and then they kind of evolve or get misused. And one thing that happens for sure a lot is that there's a lot of laziness around. So it's kind of easy to kind of label people. People like putting people into boxes, and because it's neat. And I think there was, going back to my early time in PwC, when I said about the network, when there were 8 non-white partners out of 800, if it was just me, then it would have been quite difficult to engender change. But having a group of us who had a shared experience of what it was like to be non-white in the firm gave us a lot more power, and we got listened to. So there was a real importance, and I believe there still is, for people of all backgrounds, particularly those who share sort of the status of a sort of visible minority, here in this country, to club together and push for change. And the fact that the people who are grouped within the concept of Black and Asian and minority ethnic are now, well, as of the last census 10 years ago, 40% of the London population, is a massive point. And if we want to fracture ourselves down and just be in our little groups in meeting in phone boxes, we won't have the same political effect. So I think there's a reality here that it is worth clubbing together, because when I grew up in the 70s, there were people who were, Indian, Bangladeshi, African, Caribbean, African, who had very similar experiences. They're not the same, but they had points in common, and it was worth working together. And I think if you look at what's happened with the relative success of sexual orientation campaigns in terms of anti-discrimination that Stonewall have led, LGBT or LGBTQ, then they haven't had a major issue with being lumped together in that sense, because they've been achieving something politically which is important. And I think there are good reasons as a result for people from minorities to work together and actually to help collectively work on the anti-discrimination message. So that's kind of why I think it's important to work together. That doesn't mean that people should all be chucked in the same box and labeled as BAME. Firstly, I've encouraged people not to use it as an acronym as far as possible, because it tends to be used as a sort of lazy shortcut. Whereas at least if you have to say Black, African, Black, Asian and minority ethnic, it's a bit more of an effort, and you're being a bit more descriptive about who you mean. But if you mean everybody who's non-white, then that's a way of describing them. And there are other ways you could try, like visible minorities or just ethnic minorities.
Sorry, Paul. I've got a question that's come in from Kelly in London, and she has said one of the things that has been very upsetting for her is the word minority. She feels that being called minority, it doesn't make her feel good. It does something to her self-esteem. And is there something that you think that should be done about that? She's sort of written in and said that.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I mean, I understand that. Of course, one thing that's going to happen when we see the new census results, almost certainly, I think it was in the last census, is that actually white British people they're just the largest minority in London. I think it was 45% in the last census, and it's going to be lower, probably nearer to 40 this time. Yeah. So actually, we're all minorities, and if you talk about the global majority, then it isn't white people either. So I think the important thing is to recognise who people are. So if you use phrases like BAME when you actually mean black, then it's wrong. Full stop, as far as I'm concerned. And a lot of footballers, for example, feel ironically, because South Asians have been virtually excluded from football, that when people use the term BAME in football, they actually mean black players. Right. So people say, well, we'll say black if that's what you mean, Yeah, that's right. So when it's basically incorrect to use, then I think it's a problem. Yeah, I mean, I've never personally interpreted being a minority to mean it's sort of negative.
Yeah.
But I know why people would, and it is sometimes used as that. I like being different. It kind of suits me. But yeah, I understand entirely that. And I think if we can find the problem is always, isn't it, finding a better term than the one you've kind of trying to get rid of. But I mean, I tend to try to use phrases like people of African and Asian, heritage, which is better, I think, African's better than black personally, because I think it's more descriptive, because Africans are different colors as well. I see that in Cameroon and Nigeria.
Yeah.
And I think, even the phrases like black African, lump in, for example, Nigerian and Somalian together, which aren't particularly helpful. But I think, the demographics have changed over my lifetime here enormously. And, if I go back to Cameroon or go to Nigeria, where I've lived for a while, no one talks about this stuff because, it's kind of irrelevant. And people only found out they were black when they got here. So all these classifications are essentially political more than anything else. And we have to choose our words carefully, but equally, one of the important things I think about the way forward is that in order to get change, we need to get the majority, if you like, which are white people, especially in business, to do things differently and think differently. And if we make it very difficult for them to speak about this, we need them to talk about it. And if we trip them up every time they use the wrong word, then they're going to clam up and stop talking about it again.
Absolutely.
So we have to somehow find a message, a kind of midway, educate people to understand they're using the right words and avoid things that cause offense, but at the same time be inclusive to them to enable them to partake in the conversation and do things differently going forward. And I think the future of diversity and inclusion has got to be focused on getting the majority to think differently and do things differently. And the majority in this country are white, especially if you go outside London. London is a very different place to the rest of the country, particularly outside the urban areas. And you'll see that if you travel.
100%. I think it's about learning from each other. And when I work with people, I always say, I'd rather you ask me something and is that the right terminology? And let's get it wrong together. It's about learning from each other. I think that's very important to learn from each other and really understand, and understand your biases, learn and read up on the different intersections, no matter which part of the diversity spectrum you come from, it's going to be different. We're coming to the end of the show at the moment, so it would be really good if you can just let people know if they want to know more about what you or connect with you, how they can do that as well.
Well, I'm on LinkedIn, and I've got a small website called paulcleal.com, which tells a bit about me and what I do. So that's the best way to find out. And you get quite a lot of entries if you Google me as well. If you can spell the name, Paul Cleal or Paul Monacoso Cleal. Monacoso is my father's name. Cleal was my mother's name. So I try to honour them both with the use of them. But yeah, on that last point, I think in terms of what you say, I always try to work out what people's intent is, and you can't ever be sure what people's intent is. But if the intent is good, then I think we shouldn't criticise people for trying to say the right thing and being curious. If the intent is bad, then that's different. The trouble is we never know for sure whether the intent was good or bad, and part of life is trying to work out which is which.
Absolutely. And I think for the most part, most people are good, you know. For
Yeah.
the most part, we've got good people and they want to do good things, and we get a few bad apples, but for the majority of people want to do the right thing. So of course, at which point, you know, I think it's the punchline that you said. I think you said organizations being focused. Yeah. I think you mentioned something focused on.
Well, I think on their mindset. I mean, really thinking about changing their mindset, changing the narrative. Some of us say sometimes. You know.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much. I could speak to you I could just go on and on because I'm learning so much, and you know, it's been speaking to you and reading up on all the fantastic things that you do, and you know, I'd really love to get you on again another time.
Sure.
Things are like, you know, some months down the line, and how things have changed, and of course, you know, we're always innovating, we're always changing, and it's been great having you on the show today. You'll be able to rewatch this over and over again, and it will be available on Spotify. So you know, the good thing is, and it's been an honor. Honestly, it's
been a pleasure for me. I've really enjoyed it, Louise. It's flown by, and yeah, we can do it again sometime.
That's brilliant. Thank you to my listeners. You have been locked into Revive FM 94.0 on the Power Hour with your host today, myself, Louise Power, and my guest, Paul Cleal OBE. Have a great weekend. Take care. Thank you.
ये आयशा है, ये बहुत